Welcome to the preaching ministry of First Cumberland Presbyterian Church of Chattanooga. This recording is simply the sermon portion of our worship service. To experience our full worship service, we encourage you and invite you to join us Sunday morning at 11 in our beautiful sanctuary located at 1505 North Moore Road.
Our passage for today comes from the Gospel of John, the first chapter, beginning with the 35th verse. The next day, John again was standing with two of his disciples. And as he watched Jesus walk by, he exclaimed, "Look, here is the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard him say this, and they followed Jesus. When Jesus turned and saw them following him, he said to them, "What are you looking for?" They said to him, "Rabbi," which translated means teacher, "where are you staying?" He said to them, "Come and see." They came and saw where he was staying, and they remained with him that day. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon. One of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which is translated anointed. He brought Simon to Jesus, who looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You are to be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Last week, my daughter Sarah and I were taking off the decorations of the Christmas tree, getting the house undecorated from Christmas. And as most of us probably do, we were talking about some of the decorations. "Oh, so-and-so gave us this when you were born. Oh, I made this when I was in kindergarten." And we were talking back and forth about the decorations. And at one point, she pulled a decoration off of the tree and she said, "This is the creepy lady decoration." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Oh, yes, this is the creepy lady decoration." She handed it to me, and it was an angel or maybe a cherub standing on top of a little ball, or maybe it was a globe, and there was sort of a banner across it that had the words or the number 2005 on there. And Sarah said, "I got this ornament in 2005 when I was 9 years old. It was Christmas time, and I was out playing in the front yard, and a car just pulled up into our driveway, and a woman rolled down the window and motioned me over, and I came over, and she handed me this ornament, and she said, 'I want you to have this ornament.' And then she backed the car out of the drive and drove away." And Sarah said, "Then I went inside the house, and I said, 'Mommy, look, this woman just gave me a Christmas tree ornament.' And of course, that was a little unnerving to Lee. 'What? Some random woman gave you an ornament? Who was she?' And Sarah said, 'I don't know.' And Lee said, 'Well, could she have been a church member?' And Sarah said, 'I don't think so. I don't think I've ever seen her before.' And they got out the church directory, and they looked through the whole church directory and couldn't find her. And Sarah just kept insisting that she had never seen the woman before. And so Sarah says, 'I always remember that as the creepy lady ornament.' And I'm a little bit surprised that it made it on our tree that year, and 18 years later it's still on our tree. But I have no memory of that story, and neither does Lee, but I'm sure that Sarah is right. Well, in this morning's scripture lesson, Jesus is walking along, and suddenly he's aware of a couple of creepy guys just kind of following him. And I don't know if it unnerves him or not, but he's not a pliable 9-year-old, and so he confronts them. "What are you looking for?" And I really picture this as a funny scene. I think John wants it to be funny. I can imagine when Jesus turns around and asks that question, their eyes get wide as saucer plates, and they look at each other, and they look at Jesus, and they look at each other, and finally one of them stammers out, "Where are you staying?" And Jesus simply responds, "Come and see." One of the things that was unnerving for Lee, I think, was that this woman that had given Sarah an ornament already obviously knew where Sarah lived, but Jesus wasn't concerned. He says, "Come and see." And of course, Jesus has much bigger things in mind than giving them a tour of the house where he is staying. In his book, The Lost Continent, author Bill Bryson tells a story about when he went to the boyhood home of Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, in Hannibal, Missouri. And he gets to the home, and he had heard all about the museum they had there, and so he pays $2 to get in and is immediately a little bit disappointed to discover that you can't actually go inside the house. You walk around the house, and you have to look in the windows to see the different rooms, and there's a pre-recorded recording that tells you what you're seeing there in each room. His disappointment grew when they claimed that the house is faithfully reproduced just like it would have been when young Samuel Clemens was a little boy growing up in that house in the 1830s. And yet, Bryson says that you can see electric cords clumsily kind of strewn about, and there would not have been electricity then. You can see in the ceiling the fire suppression sprinkler heads hanging out of the ceiling. And even worse for him, when he got to young Samuel Clemens' room, he could tell that the flooring was Armstrong vinyl, much like the Armstrong vinyl that had been in his mother's kitchen, his being Bill Bryson's kitchen when he was a child. And he knew there wasn't vinyl flooring in the 1830s. And so he's pretty disappointed, but he then notices that there's this man next to him who's been kind of walking around doing the tour with him, and this man is enthralled. And so Bryson says, well, what do you think of the house? And the man said, oh, I love this house. Every time I come to Hannibal, Missouri, I come to this house. Sometimes I'm even just kind of close by and I make a detour so that I can come and see the house. I've been here probably 20 times. Well, Bryson is a little surprised, and so he says, well, do you find that the house is similar? Do you think it's a faithful reproduction to the way that Twain describes it in his books? And the man said, oh, I've never read any of his books. I just love his house. Well, that man was a Twain tourist. He certainly was not a Twain disciple. He only wanted to see where Twain had stayed, if you will, but he wasn't really interested in learning more about Twain, at least not getting to know him through what he had written. Now, the two men who are following Jesus, Andrew and an unnamed person, begin as Jesus tourists. They are just curious. John has said, here is the Lamb of God, and they want to see who is this guy, and they're kind of following him. And then when Jesus confronts them, they say, well, where are you staying? As if going to see the house where he is staying might give them some more information, give them some more opportunities to be a tourist. And yet, by the end of the story, they aren't merely tourists, they are disciples. And we're not exactly sure how this happens, but John, the author of the gospel, gives us an interesting clue. When the two say, where are you staying? The Greek word they use is the word meno, and it can mean staying or abiding or living. And when they get to the house, Jesus says, well, here is where I am staying. And he uses exactly the same word, meno. But then John tells us that those two guys don't simply walk around the house and look in all the windows. Oh, look at the flooring there in the room where Jesus is sleeping. But instead it says they stay, meno, with him for the rest of the afternoon. They shift what is going on. They go from simply being interested in Jesus as a tourist to being interested in knowing much more about him. And they become his disciples that day. And that staying is then not only for the afternoon, but for the rest of their lives. They will stay with Jesus throughout his earthly ministry. They will stay with Jesus after the resurrection. And they stay with Jesus even offering their lives for the sake and the cause of their relationship with Jesus. They recognize that Jesus is not merely worth learning about, he is worth staying with. John also gives us this wonderful little detail in there. He says, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, we don't need that detail. It doesn't matter what time of day it was. But I think what John is trying to say is that never again could they forget the day and the time when this happened. And there are many scholars who think that that unnamed disciple is John himself, and that this detail kind of gives that away. He cannot forget that not only it was a particular day, a particular time of year, but he even remembers the time of day. On April 2nd of every year, my mother calls me about mid-morning because that was when I was born. And she wants to wish me happy birthday at the same time when I was born. She remembers the day her life changed, for good or for bad, when I was born. Her firstborn child was born. Likewise, many of us have events like that. That's what is going on here. John is telling us that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everything changed for these two. They went from being disciples of John to being tourists of Jesus to being disciples of Jesus, to staying with, abiding with, living with Jesus. John remembers that word. He remembers this. And chapters later, all the way when we get to the Last Supper, John is paying attention. And Jesus uses that word meno many times in that Last Supper. He says, abide in me as I abide in you. He is inviting the disciples to, even at that moment after they have spent years following him, to up their commitment to him even more. Come into me even more. Abide in me. Stay with me even more. And let me abide in you. Stay in you. The choice was not only theirs, it is ours. We can be tourists, we can be creepy stalkers of Jesus, or we can be abiding lovers of Jesus, allowing Jesus' love to abide in us and allowing the abiding love of Jesus to flow out of us. For that's also what Jesus says during that Last Supper. And that's also an invitation to us as well as to the disciples. Using that word abide again and again, Jesus says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. So abide in my love. Stay in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. You will stay in my love. And this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. I saw a wonderful sign on a church this week that said that daily devotions are better than New Year's resolutions. And this idea of daily devoting ourselves to Jesus, particularly thinking about that word devotion, daily living in Jesus' love is so much better than making some grand New Year's resolution that may or may not get carried out. But each and every day, staying with, abiding with Jesus will make a difference. And as we allow the love of Jesus to come into us, indeed, as I mentioned, it will flow out to others. Abide in me. Keep my commandment, and my commandment is to love one another as I have loved you. Now that commandment will be coming way down the road, but here at the very beginning, back in the first chapter, when Andrew becomes a disciple of Jesus, when he lets that love of Jesus into him for the very first time, immediately the love begins flowing from him, because we're told, and you heard me read, that after Andrew stays with Jesus for the afternoon and decides to stay, to abide, to meno with Jesus, he goes and he finds his brother Simon. He doesn't stay there in a holy huddle with Jesus, but he goes out and he finds his brother Simon, and he brings Simon back to Jesus, and the rest, as we might say, is history. Jesus says to Simon immediately there, no longer are you Simon, but now you are Peter, now you are Cephas, now you are Rock. And Peter also discovers that Jesus is one with whom he can abide. And so let us this day resolve not to be creepy stalkers, not to be Jesus tourists, but to truly be abiding lovers of Jesus, abiding lovers of one another, this day and every day. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for this message from the preaching ministry of First Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Once more, we hope you'll join us in person Sunday at 11 a.m. for worship.